Okay, thank you. Councillors doing a test. Test in, 1, 2, 3. Test in.
Just go one more time, Scott, sorry. Just do that one more time, Scott, sorry.
Okay, again, one more time. Councillors, audio and visual test. Test in, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you, councillors. We're all right to go. I'd like to declare the ordinary meeting of Blayney Shire Council for July open, and thank you all very much for your attendance. And in opening this meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which we meet, being the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to the elders, both past, present and emerging. Councillors, first item of business, we do have Councillor Reynolds, who is joining us online. Hello, Councillor Reynolds. We can see you there. I'd like a mover that Councillor Reynolds is accepted. We have a recommendation there that Council approve the attendance of Councillor Reynolds to the July 23 Council meeting by audio visual link. Can I have a mover for this? Thank you. Councillor Price-Jones has moved that way. Councillor Goswich has seconded that. I'll put that motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Welcome, Councillor Reynolds, and I'll keep an eye out on your smiling face throughout the proceedings. So, Council, just to reinforce the fact that this meeting is being live streamed, and as such, you will be recorded as part of the meeting process here this evening. Apologies, we have no apologies. Everybody's here. Disclosures of interest. Mr. GM, do we have any disclosures of interest for the business here this evening?
Through Mr. Mayor, we have one declaration of interest to date from yourself. The report title is Road Name 61 Forest East Road, Glenora Road, Millthorpe. Item 11, page 54. The reason for the interest is previously declared conflict in this development application as I undertake contracting in the building industry with the proponent. It's a pecuniary interest, so you will leave the room.
Thank you. No other disclosures of interest, councillors, this evening? Okay, thank you. Now move through to the public forum. We do have 3 public forum presentations this evening, and on behalf of the council, I'd like to welcome you here to our meeting and thank you for your time. I'd like to invite up Sandy Novak first, and Sandy's going to speak in relation to item 13, DA 2023-3. In fact, all the public forums relate to this item. Okay, Sandy, thank you. If you talk into the microphone, it should start working, and I'll give you approximately 5 minutes.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I live across the road from the potential dwelling that's going to be built, and I have some concerns around the actual development being suitable for our block and our street. So at the moment we have double blocks and with 2 house dwellings at the most on them, and my understanding is this development wants to go into a 4 house development. I just don't think it's fitting of the particular area that we're living in. I have concerns around noise, pets, potential animals running up and down the street, which we have seen before, and traffic congestion, which is a big concern of myself and my partners. Already we have a lot of traffic on our block from school, from various different other things around town, like the Centrepoint Gym, the football oval. Buses come flying around the corner of an afternoon, and my understanding is there'll be no exit into Adelaide Lane with this development, which was my biggest problem with it. The house number 50, she has built a house down the back. She's done a really great job. 2 houses on that block is suitable. 4 houses, definitely not suitable for the area. My concern is that if this development is passed, What will that mean for the other double blocks on Osmond Street and that area? Can we expect to foresee potential urban ghetto in a few years' time as these blocks fill up with tiny houses squeezed between existing houses, which we are having a bit of a problem with some people down the back from us not getting enough sun into one of their houses that was recently squeezed between two houses in a recent development that we've seen. There are asbestos concerns with the removal of this cottage, and I believe that previous asbestos has been taken from this cottage after a fire, and I also believe this wasn't done in accordance with law. So they're my main concerns with this development. I'd like you all to think about that and think about the future of Osmond Street being in the centre of Blayney. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Okay, councillors, I'd like to now invite to the microphone Alicia McGregor. Thank you, Alicia. If you'd like to come up to the microphone. Welcome, and approximately 5 minutes.
Okay, I'd like to address all the people here this evening, Honorary Mayor and councillors. My name's Alicia McGregor and I live right next door to this proposed development. Our lifestyle and what we have done for the last 40 years with the nursery and our lifestyle, I just feel there's a duty of care to understand, the council to understand that I also report about the traffic in the street. We've got the school traffic, we've got the sports oval that you're going to upgrade at Charles Street. That traffic and parking is always in our street anyway. The aquatic centre we get to, there's traffic up and back to the rail station. The hospital at the other end of Osmond, we have that. And the fire station is there. And whenever there's a fire, they often come down Osmond Street and that. And since that's been, and the events of everything that has taken place on this property since it's changed hands from John Sutton, we've had numerous people living there and coming and going, and we've had fires, car fires at the front of the house, we've had dog issues, we've had lots of problem, people jumping out fences from that area and so forth, and it's been quite a dilemma over that period of time for us in that part of our life. See, also you have the Market Day events up at the park, and we have the Anzac Day events at the park, and that's all part, they cross over like Orange Road, but it's still, they're up and down Osmond Street. We get the parking from the markets and everything in our street. So that's my concern about the parking and the transporting. Closure of lane access also includes fire emergency and centres. When the fire was on next door, we couldn't have even got our cars out of our driveway because the fire brigades and the SES and police and everything were there, and with domestic disputes at different times. If we'd have wanted to get our car out of the place, it was all blocked off from this venue. And I feel that with the nursery, parking in front of our place is just enough for a nursery. I've had offers of people coming in buses and things like that, and I've said, no, we can't, because we've got the school, and once a bus is parked, those children wouldn't be able to have a good visual effect of the street and the safety of the people in the street. And it's also used a lot by the people who come up to the park up here on Osmond Street with their dogs and that passing by all the time. There's a lot of traffic going up and down. So there'd have to be something in place so that at least the front of our place could be open and vacant for any visitors to the nursery and coming and going. Now, the stormwater to the lane must be addressed because that block, our new John Sutton and he couldn't build there because there was a lot of underground water. And Alan Sutton told me that there's a water thing. Actually, he had a well in his yard at one stage that the water comes through, and when all Friskies was doing all them things, he told me long before that what was going to happen and that the water was going to be of no use and whatever. So there is water there, like talk about Water Street, it's sort of going down there, and I had a gentleman come out to my place and he's used the thing and says, yes, the water is going under our block, under their block and everything. So there'd have to be some sort of agreement to access Adelaide Lane for the runoff from the water of all those buildings, especially, you know, you're not one roof, you're going to have, like my place, one roof, you're going to have roofs. And there's no pedestrian walkway. There is a car drive, but there's no pedestrian walkway for safety. This day and age, everybody buys online and they're delivering things to houses and that, and there's no pedestrian walkway on that venue for children, the animals that are going to be there, because people are entitled to have their animals. So there's no pedestrian walkway at all going into that plan. And then they say, so I'm asking also that a 9-foot fence would be applicable, because he's going to take all the vegetation out down that side, and you've only got 1.5 metres or something. And the 9-foot fence would have to be for the fumes that come over onto our place, and for privacy. I don't want to be involved in problems there with these people which we've had in the past. So for our privacy and for our safety, for fumes and that, we need that. Now they also said, because I talk on biodiversity and I've trained in it and been through earth sanctuaries down in Victoria and everything, they say there's no biodiversity problems. But that vegetation, we have all the birds, the parrots, everything, the blue wrens, the firetails, everything comes into that vegetation there. Because our block, I have accommodated them for that, put in fruit trees and everything for them. And we do have shinglebacks. Fred's pulled off a tarp on one of his material loads, and there was babies and shinglebacks under the tarp. They do cross in that area. They are in that venue. And blue tongues. We have quite a few blue tongues, and only on 2 occasions, but we've had them echidnas going across the back. Went down one night, and our little puppy was alive then, and she was barking. I said, get in there, let's have a look, and it was a little echidna going across. So there are living things there, and that environment, once you take that greenery away, and no yards anymore, there'll be no gardens, there won't be room for gardens or anything like that. So it's going to be an unvegetated sort of area. You can't even put the trees you'll have to take out for the drive because it's too close to the driveway. The roots would go up and there'll be no vegetation there at all. There's no room for that. So I just wanted to address that and just hope that you just take into account that our 40 years here with the business and adding to the community, I hope that you think duty of care for our well-being, and what we came to Blayney for was peace and quiet, and we've been through droughts, we've been through everything, but we still try to accommodate Blayney with a nursery. And it might be a fancy nursery, but people who come from everywhere comment on the way that's natural, normal and lovely area it is through going through the nursery. So I thank you all very much this evening for listening to me, and I hope that you can take into account some of those things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Alicia.
much.
Well done. Okay, councillors, do have our final public forum presentation. I'd invite Frederick McGregor to come to the microphone. You're right. No rush. It's all good. Councillors, and Frederick is also going to...
Good evening, councillors. My main thing is about the noise. It's going to go on for a fair while, I'd imagine. That many houses got to be built, and the racket, the banging, and all going on day and night, you know. And don't know what time they're going to be start and finish. Are they going to work weekends or holidays? Just don't know at the moment what's going on with that. But it's just mainly the noise going on for so long. It's going to be, you know, trucks in and out, and that's why I think we need a higher fence. Might drown out a bit of the noise. I'm not sure. That's everything else been covered, but that's about the main thing I was interested in, because just going to be a hell of a racket for a long time, that's all.
That's important.
Yeah, so that's, I think we've covered everything. Thanks very much for listening to us.
Thanks, Frederick. Thanks for coming and being part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, councillors. That concludes our public forum this evening. I'd like to now draw your attention to the business paper, the confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 27th of the 6/23. Can I have a mover that is a true record? Councillor Goswich has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead has seconded that. I'll put that motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, any matters arising from these minutes of the previous meeting? Just flicking through, all good. Okay, councillors, move now through to page 17, item 2, the quarterly outstanding resolution report. There's a recommendation there. Note this report. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Goswich has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Question, comments? Councillor Reynolds? Yep, Councillor Reynolds, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Three matters that I'd just like to quickly clarify. The 19th of April 2022 was the meeting date, resolution 2204-004, with regard to the Tourism Town and Villages Committee and the format, and council engages with each village and how it engages. Could we, and possibly at the next workshop of council, actually have a discussion on how we're going to look at engaging, because that's over 12 months ago since we had that resolution, so I think it needs some movement, given that it's been over 12 months. I probably don't need a response on that one, besides if it could be noted and potentially put into the next workshop. The second one is with regard, and I don't know if there's much more information that can be provided, on the 19th of December 2022, with regard to the planning proposal to amend Blayney's LEP 2012 with regard to 34 Charles Street. It says here that DPE has requested additional information from the applicant for a full flood study required prior to determining the gateway. Is there any further information on what sort of flood study, as in how much analysis, and whether that actually fits in with the council flood study, or whether this is a separate flood study?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Who would like to take that, Mr. Director?
Thank you. No, there's not really much I can add to that. It would be expected, I suppose, as self-evident that it would be a flood study that would fit in with the work that the council has already done, but I can't really go into any more specifics of that, no.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Reynolds?
Just one more item, if I may, and it's just for noting again, the media spokesperson policy. Just wondering if we could start progressing that in the next month or so. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, still considering the resolution report. Any further questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Move now through to page 28. Item 3, the Risk, Work, Health and Safety Quarterly Report. Recommendation there. Councillors, do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you. Councillor Ewan has moved that way. Councillor Price-Jones has seconded that. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to the Risk, Work, Health and Safety Quarterly Report? Councillor Goswich.
Just the cost has gone up by 10%. Is that due to be just on average, or is it because we are falling behind a little bit?
Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, it's actually through me. I might have to take that on notice, Councillor Goswich.
No worries, thank you.
All insurances have been rising, that's for sure. Okay, still on this report, councillors. Councillor Price-Jones.
I just had a question around the insurance actually and around that 10% increase also, but also do we actually put this out to tender every couple of years and seek a variation of quotes?
Thank you, councillor.
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, Councillor Price-Jones, so council's insurance is actually through a mutual which is self-insured, so we don't particularly go to tender on a regular basis, no, because the mutual is predominantly made up of local government councils, and therefore that is a long-standing best practice for a number of councils.
That is correct. Yes, the mutual was set up because we could not get insurance from the private sector years ago. So that's why traditionally, well, the convention is now we use that as the best provider. I'd be interested to know if there were private sector insurance companies that would even look at local government with our risk profile and the amount of assets that we control. But so it has been the norm. But yeah, no, we haven't regularly sought other tenders for it because it is a mutual. So the more councils that are in it, obviously the more effective and efficient it is.
Maybe not as cost effective, like there's
probably currently no. As it stands now, we couldn't say that without investigating it.
No, and through Mr. Mayor, I'm aware that some councils have gone to tender. I can think of 3 off the top of my head, and I know 2 have recently come back. So after going through that process, I can find out some more information if you'd like to know some that have gone, and happy to have that chat.
I mean, I'm interested generally. It's important, especially as it costs.
Thank you, Councillor Price-Jones. Councillors, any further questions or comments from the Risk, Work, Health and Safety Quarterly Report?
Thanks,
Councillor Ewan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I see we've had quite an increase in most avenues of our risk, health and safety with our reporting, which is excellent to see that. And then on the other hand, we've had very slight increase with any incidents. So that's probably a pretty good outcome considering that our reporting has more than tripled in some of the assessments and observations and the toolbox meetings. So that's good to see. Yeah.
I think we have some confidence, quite some confidence in our systems in regards to work health and safety. Councillors, any further questions or comments? This report, Councillor Reynolds is fine. I'll put the motion if there's no other questions. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Move now through to page 31. Item 4, Report of Council Investments as at the 30th of June. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Price-Jones has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to the Council Investment Report? Councillor Somerville.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see that we received just before the end of June 3.46 million under our advance payment of the FAGS grant, which is very welcome. But I also see that the total funds invested, despite that boost of 3.46 million at the end of June, are still roughly the same as they were, in fact maybe even slightly less than in February. So it makes me think that if we hadn't received the 3.46 million, then our funds under investment would have shown quite a substantial decline as at the end of June. And if that's the case, what's the reason for that? Have there been big bills to pay for construction contracts or something like that? Because the point I'm getting at is that this big influx of money at the end of the year hasn't really changed our total money under investment, which suggests that without it, the funds would have gone down quite a bit.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. I'm not sure if the director to answer that.
Council did receive earlier this year a significant advance of some government grants, and it was in the order of $8.4 million. That would have caused that, I'm surmising that would have caused the large increase there, and then obviously through the spending patterns thereafter, that's eroded those values. And yeah, so when you're comparing February to June, I imagine that'll be the contributing factor. I can certainly take your question on notice and pass a formal response back to council, but I believe it would be just monthly cash flows arising from projects that we have in place and other expenditure of council.
Gone somewhere.
Yeah,
Obviously.
Through Mr. Mayor, that would have been Forestry East Road, it would have been the local roads recovery program, other recovery programs that have been undertaken in South Blayney, Gooley's Creek, and that we had a fair bit go out in a short whack of a time as well.
Yeah, that's what I thought would be the case, because it's in other words, the 3.6 million coming in has masked a decline in ordinary cash flow.
Councillor Somerville, yes. Okay, thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A quick question, may need to be taken on notice. With a lot of the financial institutions, we're currently up at the maximum allowable, and it varies on the financial institution. I did ask this question a couple of months ago, and it may be extraordinary that we've had these two lots of cash flow that have come in, and they may never occur again. But should we be potentially reviewing our investment policy and maybe increasing the amount from, say, 5 million to 6 or 7 million per institution, rather than just leaving it at 5? But at this stage, it'd be whether we could have a formal review, because it is, by the looks of it, actually impacting on our ability to have fixed term deposits, because we've maxed out on many of the major institutions.
Councillor Reynolds just suggesting that it'd be appropriate to relook at that policy maximum.
Correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any comments?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, we can certainly provide a formal response back to council. However, With the investment policy, councillors may or may not be aware that any change we make there, we need to have that endorsed by T Corp, and it's a condition of borrowing that we have with New South Wales Treasury currently. So we can certainly review that and seek whether they have an appetite for us to do that. I should also preface the fact that we have a lot of the policy maximums were around the investment guarantee per institution, although you'll note there that the more secure the bank is, the greater the maximum that we hold. But we can certainly engage with New South Wales Treasury and seek whether or not they would have a problem with us reviewing that. But we've certainly in the past we've been told that no, they have a risk committee that reviews these policies of councils and mandate that, or condition that council accept the policy that's recommended.
Yeah, I think Councillor Reynolds potentially is right that it could be timely in the current rising rate environment to revisit that and look at that and certainly get some feedback from T Corp. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any further questions or comments, councillors? If not, I have a mover, I have a seconder. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Page 37, item 5, Information Technology Quarterly Report. There's a recommendation there. I'd note this report. Councillors, do I have a mover? Anywhere in the room? Councillor Price-Jones has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Councillors, questions, comments in regards to the Information Technology Quarterly Report? All things technology. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to thank staff for providing, particularly point number 2, with regard to Council's cyber security review. Quite comprehensive information there, so I appreciate the information that has been provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any further questions or comments? As Councillor Reynolds suggested, lots of good information, very good report. No questions or comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 6, page 40, the quarterly report on the solar analytics. A recommendation there, councillors, again to note this report. Do I have a mover that way? Councillor Price-Jones, I think, got in first, and I'll take Councillor Goswich as a seconder if he's happy with that. Yeah, you're happy? Nodding?
That's right.
Hey? Yeah. Okay. Very good. You two sorted out. Councillors, we have a mover, we have a seconder. Do we have any questions or comments? Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can't let this opportunity pass without commenting on the fact that the reason we haven't been generating as much electricity from our solar facilities is the reduction in daylight hours due to the end of daylight saving. Reminds me of the fading of the curtains. I think the reason was probably that the reduction in daylight hours due to the fact we're just about at the winter solstice probably had more to do with it rather than the ending of daylight saving.
Well, that clears that up completely. Thank you. Okay, councillors, any questions or comments? Again, very informative report. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one quick note, it's a topic that I've been pursuing for a fair period of time. I know the General Manager is taking some action, is whether there is the capacity and the ability of council to invest more solar on some of our facilities. One we don't have solar on at the moment is the library. as an example, but also whether, particularly Centrepoint, it is very notable that the electricity cost of $67,000 is huge. And so if we are able to, and again, we'll wait for the report to come back, it may have a reasonable impact on councils' operating costs. But across all facilities, again, there is possibly potential to put extra solar on. But Centrepoint, we're already at 99.9 or thereabouts, so it comes under different provisions. But anyway, just more highlighting the cost and the potential opportunities that council may be able to look at in the future.
Great, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, we're still considering this report. If there's no further questions or indeed comments, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Move now through to page 44, item 7, the compliance and reporting activities. Recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover? Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Councillor Ewan, I believe. Yep, thank you. Councillor Ewan has seconded that recommendation. Councillors, questions or comments around the room? Everyone happy? Very good. We have a mover. We have a seconder. I'll put that motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Page 46, item 8, write-off of inventory. Recommendation there, councillors, to approve this write-off. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Price-Jones has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Goswich, thank you. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this item? Councillor Price-Jones and then Councillor Reynolds.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a question around the diesel, actually, the loss of diesel, and just wondering about the systems that are in place to manage that. Or explain
in place
it.
to manage the loss of diesel. Okay. Mr. Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is quite complex. There was some errors outlined in the report. Notably, we use a couple of different systems that digitise the bowsers, so we can't, fuel cannot be removed from the bowsers without a fob and without access. So there's a rounding that occurs from there as it imports into our business software, as well as there's errors with the possible errors with the tanks being manually dipped. However, the overall error equates to less than half a percent of our fuel consumption.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Councillor Price-Jones. Councillors, further questions? Councillor Reynolds, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a follow on the diesel. Is there any risk or potential that there may actually be a small leakage out of that tank? As in, do we actually undertake any monitoring to determine if there is any discharge of fuel into the surrounding ground?
Mr. Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm confident that there's no leakage. We do undertake regular inspections.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any further questions or comments? We have a move. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Page 48, councillors, item 9, Infrastructure Services Monthly Report. There's a recommendation there. The report be noted. Can I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Price-Jones has moved that way and Councillor Somervale has seconded that. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to this report? Councillor Somervale, thank you.
Yes, a question in relation to the recycled water treatment plant. Yeah, I see that we still need to do some programming for dispensing water from the standpipe. My question though is, what systems are in place for measuring the recycled water which is consumed by council for the purpose of watering its playing fields? How is that measured?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So there's electronic takeoff where we can measure how much is being sent to the various fields. Additionally, there's fobs issued to council water trucks or contractors that creates an electronic metering of the water that's dispensed from the standpipe, and then we can ensure monthly billing takes place.
So the water sent through the pipes to the various playing fields is effectively metered?
It's metered, yep.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Right, thank you. Councillor Bryce-Jones.
Just a question, thanks Mr Mayor, in relation to a draft of the landscaping concept layout. It says that it's been forwarded to us, but if I've missed something or we haven't received it yet.
Through Mr. Mayor, the landscape design, I can resend that via email and also upload that to the portal.
Okay, so can you, sorry, I must have missed it, but I just didn't know what kind of date I need to.
I'm not sure off the top of my head, sorry.
Thank you. Councillors, any other further questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to the Director with regard to Forest Reefs Road, Torwood Road intersection. Detailed design, and I see September commencement. Would Council then be looking, once that work is completed, and I'm not quite sure how many weeks, so it'd be interesting on a rough estimate, to then move on to Torwood Road? Is that what is sort of suggested, that they move straight from one project into the next project next door?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're looking at tendering full service one of those projects, so there would be a degree of concurrence in that council would move from Neville Road to one of those projects. It's likely that Forest Reefs Torwood Road intersection will be tendered as a full service project.
Councillor, still on the Director's report. I guess I'd have a question just about Unwin and Stabbick, about how close are we to actually potentially starting that? I know it's been talked about end of the year or early next year. Any thoughts of that? More of a certain of date, or it's still a bit early?
Mr. Mayor, we're still looking to start that one in 2023. So we have been negotiating with the landowner nearby to utilise their land as a temporary parking area and stockpile site, and we'll be having pipes delivered there shortly. Once we secure that site, we'll have a better indication.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, councillors, looking around the room, and Councillor Reynolds, all good? We have a mover, we have a seconder. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. So let's now move through to page 52, item 10, the addition of a name to pre-approved road and bridge name list. Recommendation there, councillors, to have a mover for this recommendation. Any movers for this? Councillor Ewan has moved that way. Councillor Reynolds has seconded that, I believe. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to this item? Fairly straightforward. Everyone happy? No questions or comments. We have a mover, we have a seconder. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Now through to item 54. Sorry, item 11, page 54. I'd like to invite the Deputy Mayor to come up and chair this item since I've declared an interest.
Thank you, councillors. The Mayor has now left the room, so we'll move on to item 11, page 54. Road name, 61 Forest Reefs Road, Glory Road, Millthorpe subdivision. There are two alternative recommendations in the business paper, option 1 or option 2. I'll put it out to councillors if someone would like to move either one or other of those, and we will take them as they come.
I'll move item 1.
Yes, okay. Councillor Newstead, you've moved option number 1. Do we have a seconder for that option?
I'll move a second so we can discuss it.
Thank you. Councillor Ewan has seconded option 1. Councillor Newstead, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I'd like to make both a comment and ask a question. As can be seen in the report, there are two options. Option 1 is the council endorse the name Mortimer Close, or option 2, the council does not endorse the name Mortimer Close and the developer selects a name from the approved or pre-approved names list. What I take from the report is this, that essentially council needs to decide whether the name Mortimer Close is considered controversial. Following the public exhibition period, it is noted that there were 4 submissions received by council. After reading the 4 submissions, it appears that 3 of the submissions don't even mention the name Mortimer Close, but have instead put forward alternate names for the new road. The 4th submission, in my opinion, was the only one to dispute the validity of the name put forward by the applicant. I asked my fellow councillors, are 4 submissions a true representation of the wider community in Millthorpe, and are 4 submissions enough for the name Mortimer Close to be rejected? Through you, Mr Deputy Mayor, I would like to ask the Director of Infrastructure Services a question. If there was no supposed controversy attached to the name Mortimer Close and no submissions had been received, would the application meet the criteria required for the road, pathways and bridge naming policy? And if so, would it have been approved without coming to council?
Through Mr Deputy Mayor, so on the components that staff are able to assess, Mortimer meets the council policy and G&B guidelines for a road name. It's only council that can assess whether submissions claiming controversy are valid. All road names need to come to council, however, and twice if there's a public submission.
Okay, if I can continue. Thank you, Mr Director. After listening to your response, I feel in myself that there is no overwhelming objection or controversy attached to the name, Mortimer Close, so I will be voting for option 1. Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Councillor Ewan, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I have no objection in regard to the name of Mortimer Close, although council have developed a lot of policies over years gone by, and we still develop and review our policies on a regular basis. My question is that we have a policy in place to go through this procedure, and it sort of doesn't really sit true with our policy. At the end of the day, the policies are there for a reason, for the process to happen correctly. And I'd be quite happy to see any of the submission names suggested be registered in our policy, and we went in the normal procedure as the policy suggests.
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Anyone else? Yes, Councillor Price-Jones.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just had a question, actually, probably to the Director, around when you're assessing the submissions against the policy. Is that a committee-based decision, or does somebody do that by themselves?
Through you, Mr Deputy Mayor, so the assessments made in alignment with the council policy and the G&B guidelines, and the outcome of that is presented to council. So that was brought to council in the previous meeting. Whether the claims made during the submission are verifiable in accordance with the G&B guidelines. So it's not generally a committee that does that, it's council staff.
Yeah, so is that an individual or a group?
So it can be one or two people, however, they use that information to make a recommendation to council.
I realise that, but my concern, I guess, is around individual bias, or not maybe fully appreciating the presentation for what it is, not having a deep enough understanding of our area, those kind of things that go into that assessment level.
Assessments
how do we, how do we mitigate that? Because when we get a recommendation, it's a narrow view of the council that we then have to tease out and work out, what that actually looks like. So it's just a question.
So it's to mitigate that, it's presented to the committee of council, where a summary of the statements made in the submission, the evidence provided for those statements, and whether it's compliance with the policy. It's council's discretion whether it's adopted.
I think that part of the policy, maybe that should be something that we review as well, along with the policy, maybe, to sort of get a better result.
I think this is true, is it not, Mr Director, that at the last meeting, when we resolved to put this proposal out on public exhibition, there was a report from council staff in relation to each of the criteria in the policy, with staff comments as to whether that particular name satisfied the various requirements in the policy. Yeah, I thought that's right. Any further? Yes, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Deputy Mayor. One of my concerns, as in if we take option one, and I do have concerns, so I'll quickly say I have concerns under section 25F, I think it is, of the policy, that there is community concern, and if we set a policy that actually has that, if there is community concern, we don't proceed. So otherwise, why have a policy? So I actually don't support option one because of what our policy currently says. But my question is, if option one were to succeed and be succeed as the recommendation tonight, as in with option two, there's a point 4 which indicates, as in the other names that have been put up, there is no pathway, if we accept option one, to look at whether we can put the other names up for review and actually take them forward. So I do have concern, because I'd like to see those names who I'm not quite sure here what to do, whether to put an amendment so that with option one, if it were to get up, that part 4 was also included or not. Because I'm going to vote against option one, but I think there's merits in part 4 if option one were to succeed.
Councillor Reynolds, might I suggest that you might like to consider moving an amendment to option 1 to include what is at the moment paragraph 4 of option 2, and if option 1 gets up, then paragraph 4 is included. If option 1 doesn't get up, well then you're no worse off.
Okay, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to move that part 4 is included in option 1 as well.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Do we have a seconder for that? Yes, Councillor Ewan has seconded that. I don't know that we need any further. That's quite clear what we're doing here, I think.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I'm happy to second that. I was just wondering whether we can get a timeline on the process should option 1 be rejected, and then it would then become part of section 4 of option 2. what would be the timeline for that to actually happen? Should that be, or the process to make that happen, and those any or all those names then become an option for the process to be included in the policy?
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. What my intention would be, when we finish the debate on option 1, to put option 1, which now, if we agree to the amendment, will include point 4. If that's carried, that's fine. If it's not carried, I'll be inviting councillors who might like to move option 2 to move that option in its entirety, paragraphs 2, 3 and 4, and we can debate that. We're dealing with the amendment by adding paragraph 4 to option 1. Are there any further discussions in relation to that? Yes, Councillor Newstead.
I want somebody to explain to me where the controversy is. What's actually the big thing about it being named Mortimer Drive? If it concerns the fact that the Mortimers, who are the descendants of who it's being named after, might live in that road, that happens all around the Shire. I can name 4 or 5 off the top of my head. Waterson's Lane, Alan and Jan Waterson still live there. Kingham's Lane, Kingham still live there. Dowsett's Lane, Fardell's Lane, Toohey's Lane, Wilson's Lane. What is the controversy? Is it, and this might be controversial, is it people who have still got a bitch with the fact that the subdivision was passed in the first place? I've copped abuse over this, and I think it's all been a bit of a farce myself. And like I said, I'm voting for the first option, whatever happens. And I think some people maybe need to grow up. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Newstead, we are debating at the moment the proposed amendment to include item 4 as part of option 1.
I'm happy for that amendment to go in.
Thank you. Well, let's deal with that first. All those in favour of that amendment? That's carried. Thank you very much. So option 1 now reads paragraph 1 as in the business paper, together with paragraph 4 in the business paper. Councillor Newstead has just expressed another opinion in relation to the overall motion of option 1. Are there any further comments in relation to option 1? I mean, Councillor Newstead just raised a question of wondering whether anyone could explain to him whether there's controversy here or not. I think my reaction to that would be this is purely a matter for each of the councillors to judge in their own minds as to whether the submissions we've received amount to sufficient controversy in the broader community, as that expression is used in our policy.
Can I just make one other comment? If you look on Google, the population of Millthorpe is apparently 1,252 people. 4 submissions is 0.32 of 1% of that population. What do the other 99.7% of the people think? You know, is there really that much angst in the community that Mortimer's Close is going to cause that much controversy? That's all I need to say.
I think Councillor Newstead has just closed the debate as the mover by speaking to wrap up his comments. So I will put option 1, which, to remind you again, includes paragraph 4. All those in favour of option 1, which is the motion before the meeting?
Aye.
That's 3 in favour. And those against? 3 against. I think the Chair, I'll just clarify our procedures here. I think the Chair has a casting vote. The Chair has a casting vote, And in accordance with normal protocol in relation to a casting vote, I'm going to cast my casting vote against option 1 to preserve the status quo. So I therefore declare the motion has been lost. That being the case, I will now ask councillors if anyone would like to move option 2. Councillor Reynolds, is it seconded? Councillor Price-Jones, thank you. Councillor Reynolds, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. As I've mentioned, I believe, and as you've highlighted, it's an individual councillor's judgment on whether you thought there was a issue with section 25F of the policy. In my judgment, there was, hence why I couldn't support option 1. The community feedback we have had, and if you look at a lot of projects, we are very lucky to get 3 or 4 community submissions. On some of the bigger ones, we do get more. But there is an indication in the community that there is a strong support, particularly to promote women. And while this option doesn't give you the option of putting forward a name as the developer proponent would select from our list, but the community as a whole has indicated, and I was also at a community meeting where there was a strong push to support having women acknowledged, because most of our names are men. But there were a large number of pioneer women. So I see with particularly part 4, which is within this option as well, that gives the community an opportunity to come forth with a number of names. So I support option 2. The developer looks at our names list and comes back forth. But at the same time, what I would strongly encourage, when we go out to community feedback with option 4, the Mortimer family look at putting forward the name Mortimer to that panel, and council, as in developers in the future or councils in the future, may have the opportunity to utilise that name on another street below. So that's what I see as an opportunity, as in to actually use it. It's just more the contentious nature of using it for this particular development that I have concerns about, hence why I'm supporting the second option and paragraphs 2, 3 and 4. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any further comments or questions in relation to option 2? Yes, Councillor Goswich.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll be supporting option 2 because we have a policy there. The Mortimer could have come 3 months ago, 4 months ago, and put the Mortimer name up, and then we could have accepted it on the naming committee. They didn't. It's come through this way, and I think it's the horse before the cart, or the cart after the horse. So we have a policy there. We have pre-approved names on it, and that's why I'll be supporting for option 2.
Thank you, Councillor Goswich. That's very clear. Any further questions or comments in relation to option 2? If not, I will put option 2. Those in favour? Declare that carried. Councillor Newstead has asked that his name be recorded as voting against option 2. Well, that concludes item 11 on the business paper, and I'll now vacate the chair and hand it back to the Mayor.
I know, I was going to say, you're outside all day, I don't know why.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, now we're up to page 57, item 12, the Blayney Shire Active Movement Strategy. Recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Goswich has moved that way. Councillor Price-Jones has seconded that. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to the Blayney Shire Active Movement Strategy 2023? There's been certainly a lot of work on this strategy, very important strategy. It's been very popularly received, the improvements to footpaths around our shire over the last few years. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and fully endorse your comments. And if you actually look at the mapping, which is provided in the business papers, for a lot of Blayney and for a lot of the villages, we are nearly there, and particularly Blayney. There's only a few streets, and we're going to do some more work in the next 12 months to fill in, and in the operational plan, a lot of the missing links in the next year or two after that, where we should pretty well have most of the main part of Blayney with footpaths and a link around most of Blayney. There's still a couple of areas where we still need links finished, but they're in this active movement strategy, so there is a plan there. As in, when I came on the council 6 years ago, we have moved light years ahead with regard to the footpaths in our community. There's still a bit to be done in Millthorpe, and in most of our other villages there's at least one footpath that we still need to complete outside of the funding and get Bridge about to see some major footpath work done in next few months, and in Millthorpe at the moment. Council doing footpath work on a couple of footpaths there to further increase the footpath network. So overall, fully support and have had strong positive feedback. But the most positive feedback I get is seeing the usage of those footpaths. I am noting a large number of those footpaths where pedestrians are now walking rather than walking on the side of the road or walking on wet grass and slippery grass. So major advancement, and fully support this recommendation tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Pretty good summary. Councillors, any further questions or comments in regards to the adoption of this strategy? All good? We have a move, we have a second. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, thank you. Councillors, now move through to page 69, item 13, demolish existing residential dwelling house and auxiliary buildings, erection of a multi-dwelling development and community title subdivision 46 Osmond Street, Blayney. This was the subject of our public forums earlier this evening. We have a recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Reynolds says that way. Councillor Somerville has seconded that. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to this item, which obviously involves quite a reasonable development on the street of Osmond Street? Questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to firstly thank the community members that have addressed council tonight over concerns and issues that they do have with this development, and also the written submissions that council did see. I think there was I forget the exact number, but around about 3 or 4 submissions, maybe 5. And in looking at the block, and looking at council recommendations with regard to this development application, I think most of the concerns have been addressed in the council report and the council recommendations. To put a fence, I think one of the addressees tonight was talking about, I think it was a 9-foot fence, is outside of our current policies, as in it's, my understanding, higher than what is permissible. But the general manager or director may be able to clarify on that situation. Is that correct, that we can't go higher and put it at a 9-foot fence?
Yeah, the standard residential fence would be a 1.8 metre colour-blind fence as a boundary. have to check if there is any limitation on the height of colourblind fences as per the DCP. However, probably the only comments I make would be if one was looking at noise attenuation, and I must admit, looking back through the submissions, I'm not sure that noise really came out before this evening. It is a residential development. In my view, 0.3 of a difference in fencing height would have no impact in terms of noise attenuation.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think with that information, Osmond Street is already a busy street, as was highlighted, with usage already from fire service through to buses, but council putting a load limit on Osmond Street has actually probably reduced the amount of heavy vehicles that generally use that street. So yes, as in, it will increase the number of residents, and there will be some impact on neighbours, but it also falls within our policies and guidelines what has been submitted. So I therefore will support this development application this evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Somerville.
Yes, thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. And I also like to thank our public forum speakers tonight. Reinforce their submissions in relation to their concerns with this subdivision. Clearly, this is a very intensive subdivision, particularly compared to what's there at the moment. And as the report makes clear, the reason it is so intensive, some 360 square metres for each property, each lot, compared to our 450 square metre minimum residential lot size. The reason for that is it's being done under a community title subdivision, and under our LEP there is no, the 450 minimum residential lot size doesn't apply to a community title subdivision. So it is very intensive, but for better or worse, it's permissible under our LEP. Some of the other issues raised in relation to parking, traffic, noise, I do understand those issues, but as Councillor Reynolds has pointed out, Osmond Street already carries quite a bit of traffic. Issues in relation to biodiversity were raised, but the report makes it clear that this property hasn't been identified as biodiversity pursuant to the local environment plan terrestrial biodiversity mapping. And similarly, in relation to groundwater, whilst I understand that there may well be groundwater not too far below the surface, hence the old well, nevertheless, it hasn't been identified as having groundwater vulnerability under our LEP. So, whilst I do understand all the objections that have been raised, like Councillor Reynolds, at the end of the day, I think this development ought to be approved. It complies with our development control plan, and therefore I also will be supporting the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. I'd like to take the opportunity just to pick up on some of the comments of the public forum this evening. And again, you touched on it around the stormwater. Just a bit of clarification around the proposal here to put in a stormwater detention tank. Councillor Goswich was going to ask this question. So, Councillor Goswich, would you like to ask that question, please?
I was just about to ask the same question. Sorry to cut in on you, Mr. Mayor.
No, away you go.
I might have my numbers around the wrong way, but I don't understand why number 1 will have a tank and 2, 3 and 4 won't. Is 4 the back house? So wouldn't it be on the bottom side of the block? And then all the stormwater's coming back to Osmond Street? Is that how I read it? And not using Adelaide Lane?
Which house is it? Which residence is it actually servicing?
The Mayor, the crux of it is that all stormwater will be collected in via tank, and then it'd be a charge system back to Osborne Street, so there'd be no discharge into Adelaide Lane.
That's my question.
So my understanding is that 2, 3 and 4 will discharge straight to Osborne Street, yet residence 1 will go to Osborne Street via a retention tank. It's not that clear on the plan.
Mr. Mayor, I think there's a standard tank on each development, like as in a basics tank. There's no specific detention basin as such.
Absolutely, like a rainwater collection tank off the roof for the basics, but this is saying stormwater detention tank before being diverted to Osborne Street, and dwellings 2, 3 and 4 will be diverted directly to Osborne Street as per the submitted plan. I get this is what I'm trying to understand. Is it a stormwater detention vessel, or is it actually a rainwater tank to comply with basics?
Number 37 of the proposed consent, which requires is to construct an on-site stormwater detention system in pre-development. So that covers the on-site detention system, but my understanding is there are two aspects. One is the collection of rainwater through the basics requirements, but there's also dealing with stormwater from the development, and the on-site detention system is the mechanism that then charges and goes back into Osborne Street if there is no fall, which I don't think there would be for, as you rightly point out, the fall towards Adelaide Lane obviously goes towards the rear. So,
I guess the point I'm getting to, is it good development to have, like, who's responsible for the maintenance and the upkeep of this detention vessel, and is it really good infrastructure management to...
There's a standard management arrangement, as I understand, under a community title scheme, in terms of community title, and no doubt Councillor Somerville will have a better understanding than I, is that community title differs from strata title in that the lots have the buildings and the land surrounding them, and there is community land as well, which there is a community body which is responsible for the ongoing maintenance thereof. So that'd be my...
Okay, so it's an important piece of infrastructure that will actually...
So there wouldn't be council that be maintaining it, no.
Council won't be maintaining it. The idea of that is to stop any discharge onto Adelaide Lane, which is pretty much not a formed.
That would be the intention, I'm sure. Because Adelaide Lane, as I understand, at that point is it's unsealed section, and there wouldn't be any drainage in place for that to be dealt with, no.
Okay, no, that's an interesting point. Was there any, maybe to the Director, was there any consideration in regards to the entrance and exit of the property to Adelaide Lane, or was it just as appropriate to have it the way it's designed with the...
My understanding is that's what was submitted and that's what was assessed.
And that's what complies, so yeah. So potentially it's not a better or worse development if it were to... if a condition was to go to Adelaide Lane.
Probably some speculation. There's probably some pros and cons. There could be, if you were to have a through road through there, you're potentially losing one car parking space, whereas there might be a counter argument to say that you flow through in one way direction. If that was to flow through onto Adelaide Lane, then perhaps there'd be requirements there for some works to be done on that section of lane as well. But the council can only consider what's been lodged in front of it, so that is what's been lodged.
The General Manager's pointed out to me that one of the conditions, 29, is for the proponent to lodge a stormwater management plan to be approved by council. So potentially still a bit of work to do around that. Yep. Okay, that's fairly important. Councillors? Councillor Goswich?
Yeah, I'd like to thank the speakers tonight. Also, they mentioned about the asbestos and previous problems that might have happened. We're speculating. And not having seen this before with demolition coming through, like being a newer councillor, do we monitor this, or does workplace health, does WorkCover monitor it? Who monitors the demolition of this building if we approve this? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor.
It's an interesting question. There's a standard condition of consent in relation to demolition and the requirements of the Australian standard, which the developer has to comply with. The Safe Work Australia, I'm sure, won't be on site monitoring that. There'll be certain responsibilities, I would think, which should be assigned to the certifying authority, and at this stage we don't know if that's council or a private certifier in terms of monitoring the actual condition of consent.
Thank you, Councillor Goswich. Councillors, any further questions or...
Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Ewan?
Yeah, just to, well, not clarify, but in regard to the access and regress from Adelaide Lane, although it wasn't asked for that in the original DA, would it not be advantageous to council to have an access through there and ask the developer contribute to the upgrade of that part of Adelaide, just for the flow of the resident traffic in and out? Should we not request that be a consideration by the developer? And also, there was a question raised by one of the addressees in regard to the noise level. My interpretation was that more so not the ongoing noise if the development was passed and from the residents, but possibly from the construction, which I would imagine would working hours of the construction. Yes, so there were a couple of questions, and of course I was pretty concerned about the stormwater, but knowing that by the developer for the stormwater should... Yes, so I guess my question is in regard to the Adelaide Lane access regress as
So I think the directive, but I think obviously the proponent's consultant has put to council something that is being that two-way. I think reality is, as it is in front of us, it is provable and does comply. Would that be correct?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct. Yeah. The second part of the question, I just want to...
I would imagine that the construction is going to be within the working hours of...
There is a standard condition in terms of hours, that's correct, yes. Yeah.
Thank you, councillors. How are we going? Any further questions or comments? On a couple of things. One is, and I appreciate residents medium density development in our town and throughout our shire, and I personally have had been impacted by medium density development. Reality is that this type of development as it stands is permissible in our LEP plan. It was brought in 2012, I believe. And or neighbours who, and I was one of them, used to very a medium density development next door. So in reflection, and the point I think was made the potential cumulative impact of medium density throughout our shire, because let me assure you all that when in 2012, when a lot of these new control plans and LEP was changed and supported, was that we had no idea that 10 years later we'd be seeing the type of development and pressure, not only within Blayney but throughout the shire and indeed throughout the state. So I guess in reflection, I think there might be an opportunity in regards to using this development proposal as it sits in front of us to take the opportunity to reflect on what the potential cumulative impact of future developments like this might be within our shire, and the locations and that infrastructure impact. While we have a report in front of us to say that it does comply, it's certainly there are certainly a few concerns and that need to be addressed and potentially will be addressed in the management plan, for example, in stormwater. But it just highlights to me, sitting here thinking again from the comments of the public forum, that there is a conversation to have with our community about the yield and about the location of medium density, and good planning means that residential housing, there should be a variety of it, and it should be spread out through a township, not necessarily all put together. And you can imagine where this sort of development, if it became more and more prominent, that we'd have to be very wary of the cumulative impact. I see that this, as it is now on the single street, will have impact, but not certainly as much as if there was another 2 or 3 potentially in the same street. So looking through the conditions of consent and lining them up with all the notes that we've taken in regards to the concerns of the public forum, they are certainly, most of them are addressed, the legitimate concerns, and this is what the process is supposed to do, is supposed to address the concerns of our community. But if, I think just in regards to the future, regardless of decision on this development, I think it's very appropriate that we do take an opportunity to consider what sort of potential impact, cumulative impact, that medium density will have on our community right throughout the shire. It's a problem that we would have loved to have had 10 years ago, but here we are now facing it, and our community's facing it, and we need to be aware of those impacts. Okay. Councillors, I think that's it. If there's nobody else would like to comment on it, we have a report in front of us, we have a recommendation in front of us, we have a mover, Councillor Reynolds, Secretary and Councillor Somerville. There's no further comments. I will put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. A call for a division, and call the decision unanimous, and as such it is passed. Okay, councillors, moving through now to item 14, DA 2020-87, modification application, change of use and internal alterations, 27 Victoria Street, Millthorpe. Councillors, have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Goswich has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor, you. Councillors, questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd actually like to move an amendment and it's difficult because it's not numbered, but the last sentence in the recommendation that starts the plan of management, I'd like to move that the amendment read, the plan of management shall be brought back to council prior to the use of the veranda after 8:30 p.m.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Okay, so I've got the recommendation there. So you're looking at a second point to that recommendation, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, just amending the last sentence.
Just going up the screen now, the plan of management shall be brought back to council prior to the use of the veranda after 8:30 p.m. How about we just have the plan of management or the draft plan of management or whatever just comes back to council for, would that be easier? I think we get the intent, Councillor Reynolds.
I'm happy with the simplified wording.
Okay. Yeah, how about we just put plan of management or the draft or the proposed?
We're still in an amendment at the moment. We're still in an amendment at the moment.
Maybe just suggest that the draft plan of management should be brought back to council.
That's the suggestion, yes.
Councillor Reynolds is happy with that, just to make it a little bit short, sharp and succinct. There's no... Councillor Reynolds, talk to that amendment to get a seconder. Councillor Reynolds or Councillor Somerville?
Yeah, I'll second it, but might I suggest that it would be clearer if the plan of management was brought back to council for approval. I mean, at the moment,
just back to council. Yes, of course.
The condition is satisfied simply by bringing the plan back to council.
Words are important. Councillor Reynolds, Councillor Reynolds, are you happy with that? Thank you.
Happy with the extra 2 words, I think there were.
Now, councillors, any comments or thoughts on this amendment, which could become, I'll ask the mover and the seconder in a minute if they'd like, if they're happy to have it as part of the motion, but we can do it this way because we need the motion and the amendment. Everyone's reasonably happy. I'll ask just to simplify this, I'll ask the mover and the seconder if they're happy to include that in the original motion. So it'll be two points. Okay. Okay, councillors, sorry, I'm trying to fast track this. We'll go back to the amendment. We have the amendment. We have a mover and a seconder for the amendment, which will, I'm assuming, will be attached to the original motion, not supersede the original motion. Councillors?
The amendment.
We have a mover for the amendment. We have a seconder for the amendment. Questions or comments? Seems a pretty reasonable course of action. Thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
I just wanted to explain why I moved the amendment, in that we did get some community feedback on the original when it was put out for exhibition, and to be totally transparent and so that the community can understand what the plan of management is. It's therefore, if it's brought back to council, it's a transparent document that then is, so the community understands what council has agreed to with this plan of management that is being put up. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, still discussing Councillor Reynolds' amendment. Comment, Mr. General Manager.
Through Mr. Mayor, well, I understand Councillor Reynolds' intent to bring it back to council. It does complicate things quite significantly because a plan of management, it bends and flows with the development. We've done this recently at Blayney in particular. It's a very, very similar process, and it's been in well over 12 months now with no impact. I think it's quite an overstep to bring it back because the plan of management should be able to flex without having to come back to council. So that's all I'd like to add on that.
Okay, so the plan of management of Blayney didn't come back to council.
No, they do it. We to and fro over specifics. We would probably put a detail as to what excessive noise in and stuff like that. It goes back and forward a bit like a game of tennis until we're happy with it, and it can address all of the concerns. So,
And it's still a public document.
anyone can walk down the street.
Yeah, so the example that you're using is still a public document. Okay, Councillor Reynolds, General Manager, has concerns about coming back to council.
Just to try and answer and whether we need to wordsmith slightly more, and apologies if I haven't wordsmithed it well enough. After the toing and froing, so the final plan of management shall come back to, but it's difficult because, again, council has to approve the final plan of management, but after the toing and froing, I don't want council to be toing and froing and saying, oh no, we want this added, as in once staff have developed what they believe is a final plan of management and the proponent has put forward the final plan of management and agreed to it, that final plan then come back to council for final ratification before it's enacted.
Councillor Somerville, thoughts?
Yeah, I think I was going to say much the same thing as Councillor Reynolds has said. My understanding of the way the amendment would work is that certainly council wouldn't get involved in negotiating the plan of management with the owner. Council would continue to do that, and when it was in a state where the staff and the owner were happy with the way it looked, then there'd be a final stage to go through, which would be the approval of council. And if the General Manager is concerned about anything that's evolving in the draft plan of management, no doubt he can workshop that with councillors on the way through.
Through Mr. Mayor, I just don't see the benefit of bringing it back. It's quite an operational matter, and we're now going to chew up a fair bit of resources for no tangible benefit.
The tangible benefit would be it's become, well, it's a public document, and like it was just, so what we're saying is that we expect a plan of management to be negotiated between the proponent and council.
Yeah, the proponent would develop and address all of the concerns and go back and forth until we're happy with it and go, yep, as we've done with numerous plans of management, as occurs in quarries and all types of things. None of those come back to council.
None of those come back to council. Okay, this is an interesting conversation, councillors. Taking on board Councillor Reynolds' concerns and the fact that we did have a couple of public submissions. But we do have an amendment here in front of us, councillors. It's been moved by Councillor Reynolds, second by Councillor Somerville. Any further questions? Do we understand? Councillor Ewan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Not a question, or just a comment. In believing that our director knows the situation and the council's understanding of it, I would believe that I'd be happy to have my faith in our director to execute the plan of management on our behalf to the satisfactory standard that we're asking.
Councillor Ewan. Very good. How are we going, Councillor Price-Jones?
Question?
Talk close to the microphone, thank you.
Sorry.
Maybe lift it up a little bit.
Thank you.
And,
So I guess I'm probably a little confused as to how this works. I understood when we were discussing this in a recent workshop that one of the things around this particular request is obviously there's been some feedback from neighbours, but also too we talked about the role of council staff in terms of managing the process. And I may be misunderstanding, but this looks like that every single time they want to do something there after 8:30, it has to be approved by council, like by council staff. Is that how I read? That's how I'm reading it. Sorry, and that seems onerous. And I thought that was what a lot of the chat was around, trying to come up with the best possible scenario where we relieved ourselves of that ongoing involvement.
Well, yeah, that's right. I suppose what we're seeking to do is to really put the ball back in the court of the operator, if you like, to tell us in a publicly available, fully transparent document how noise will be managed and what process will be put in place should complaints arise. Now, we've certainly had some discussions about what that plan of management may look like. We've also referred to some current documentation for other premises, which I think the General Manager has alluded to. So what we would anticipate being in that document would provide not only, I suppose, the assurance from the operator how he's going to manage noise and manage complaints, but also provide something that those in the community, they know what the process is. If they do have a complaint, we would anticipate that the plan of management would have a number which they could be referred to the proponent. The proponent would have to undertake certain actions if there was a noise complaint. The proponent would have to come back to council and let us know what happened in relation to that complaint. And we would have to then be satisfied that it has been adequately dealt with and there's not an ongoing issue. That's the basic things which we'll try to achieve by the plan of management.
Mr. Mayor, if I can just add to that. So basically what a plan of management does is set a structural document in more detail that's clear and transparent that can't be lumped in as a massive condition. So we consider the noise impacts here as a condition and alter them as per that condition, and then we have the plan of management which kind of gives further detail and guidance for all parties.
So we don't have anything like that in place in Blayney for the pubs and kind of thing currently for any other person who's commercially operating in that space?
Not
hotels, you know.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor
I don't know
Price-Jones,
whether we do, but
the simple answer is unless they've done a development and it needs to be considered, that's where it would normally come in. And it's normally unless we get a complaint that it goes in, but generally, no, there've been some in. That one went in on the bowling club development, so it depends if there is a development application that has triggered it, and then it depends if there's submissions and the actual use, it does go in, but only if there's a recent development application to trigger such an input. So the old pubs and stuff like that that have not had a recent DA, no, they wouldn't in particular.
but it's a standard now for anybody wanting to do this in this space.
Depends on a number of it depends on a number of certain circumstances as such. It's not a blanket, yes, it will apply. It's a mechanism to address concerns and ensure noise is a very subjective issue, and it is very subjective. So, and a plan of management is an appropriate mechanism which the Land Environment Court has even supported as addressing as a tangible measure to address those concerns and set in place a clear structure.
I think particularly when there's an interface of residential premises, I think it's a very good mechanism to deal with it.
Is that you can't really avoid that? You can't even avoid that in Blayney. On the the ant track, I suppose, is what I would call it. But I just sort of, I feel like that, I would have thought that the licenses and the other things that you have to do as a business person, kind of, it seems odd to me that we're, like, as a council, standing over them in something that they should be doing automatically anyway, and they should be bearing the brunt of any where they actually don't follow normal noise standards, which I believe is 11 o'clock before 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever that is. That then just they're bound to follow those, and that's as far as it goes. I sort of find it a little strange that we're other than what is normal law.
This is not a licensed premises, so it doesn't fall under the auspices which could happen in that, and the controls which would come under that.
But even as a resident, you can't disrupt the public, you can't disrupt your neighbours. There's rule, like, you know, if you do, the police get called, and then that's mattered. It's handed in that way.
The reason there are I suppose provisions in the Protection of the Environment Operations Act in relation to noise and providing councils, when they are what's known as the appropriate regulatory authority with powers to issue what's called prevention notices in certain circumstances. There are provisions under the Protection of the Environment noise control regulations. Now, the provisions of the regulations are quite specific, and they, for example, regulate things such as air conditioning noise, musical instruments, amplified music, and those sort of things. And they do place hours of operation under those very specific items. My understanding is that there would also be provisions which would be brought to bear in respect of the licensed premises as well. So this doesn't really neatly fall under any of those. So what we've tried to do is sort of take some of the points within those other pieces of legislation and regulation and mould them into something which will suit the circumstances. But there's not actually something neat in relation to this type of activity, and that's what we've tried to mould, I guess.
I guess then I would go back to saying that maybe 8:30 is onerous just by value of the time it is, and maybe there should be a different time that this kicks in, so 10 o'clock or something that's reasonable. People who are having weekends away, enjoying accommodation, going out to dinner, sitting back and having a drink, you know, like, I think, yeah, I feel like it doesn't quite fit, so.
I think I certainly I couldn't agree with Councillor Price-Jones more, really, but the reality is we have a sensitive location in our heritage village that has, and we have received some submissions. My understanding that the operator is reasonably happy to develop up a effective plan of management for how he handles activities on the premises, especially in regards to noise. The thing we need to consider is the more of a technical point of Councillor Reynolds' amendment. As the General Manager has stated, this is not normal practice, because a question I had was, if it's endorsed by Council and it needs to change, and potentially might change a week later, does it have to come back to Council if we go down this road that Councillor Reynolds is proposing? It becomes a public document regardless of whether it gets endorsed by Council or not. What we're saying as a group is that we expect a reasonable management plan to be put in place, that everyone benefits from it, the operator and indeed the community, and as the Director said, it's probably more of a roadmap about what happens. As Councillor Price-Jones has said very well, that the reality is a good operator will run that without, or very minimal impact on their neighbours. It's just common sense. But having a management plan there does give us some mechanism. So I don't think it's about the management plan as such, it's about our Councillor Reynolds' amendment to bring it back to Council. I'm just concerned that, and I understand the thought, but I guess if it's endorsed by Council and it changes a week later, does it have to come back to Council? Does it have to keep coming back to Council every time it changes?
options, I would think so, yes.
Yeah, I'd be very uncomfortable with that. Councillor Reynolds, what's your thoughts on that? That if it comes back to council, which is a fair and transparent idea, but it could trigger an ongoing and constant review of that plan as it changes, evolves, shrinks, gets bigger. What's your thoughts?
A question possibly through to either the general manager or the director. If it doesn't come back to council, how does the community know, because it's not a public document, what council's agreed to with this plan of management with regard to noise?
I can comment certainly in the discussions we've had thus far and some documentation that we've provided to assist the proponent. What we've suggested is within the body of that management plan or plan of management, that there is a requirement that is to be made available to those members of the community. So it is available, and also a mechanism in there that they know what to do in case they have to complain. So that sort of level of detail certainly can be put into the plan of management.
So a follow-up, if I may, Mr Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Reynolds.
So is it put on the council website somewhere for the public to see, or is it just the proponent going and dropping in the letterbox of a number of neighbours?
Mr Mayor, I wouldn't envisage that a plan of management for an individual development of this magnitude would be put on council's website. It'd be probably more the latter, but for a requirement within the plan of management, that it is brought to the attention of those parties, and that the council, as in the council officers, have to be satisfied that that has occurred.
So yes, it would be available, absolutely. Have to be available to the community to understand the plan.
Mr Mayor, it'll also form part of the consent, and anyone can email in and get any development consent.
Yes. Councillor Somerville.
Just one comment in relation to the issue you raised about, does council have to approve every time it needs to be amended? I think the answer to that is pretty simple. If the plan of management comes to council for endorsement, and that plan of management by its terms says this plan of management can be amended by agreement between the developer and the director, then once the original version's approved, council's approving the method by which it'll be subsequently amended, which won't involve the council again. It's just a tick on the original plan, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville, for clearing that up. That's probably not a bad way forward, actually. Okay, councillors, any other further questions or comments? We're having a good go around on this. We have an amendment that's been moved by Councillor Reynolds and seconded by Councillor Somerville, and that is for the after negotiations with the operator and staff for that management plan come back to council with the appropriate wording. That's some of the ideas that have been discussed here this evening, and of course which will be made available to the public in the right avenues. Okay, no further questions or comments. If that's a summary, I'll put the motion. All in favour of the amendment? Okay, declared against, declared carried, and we now move back to the amendment then becomes part of the motion. So we now have 2 dot points. Moved by we have an expanded motion that's been moved by Councillor Goswich and Jones, I believe.
The motion.
Yeah, it is.
So we're going back to the original motion.
if we're now,
To the motion?
we're now discussing the original motion, which has been moved and seconded? Correct. Okay, thanks. I think this is a question. The two bullet points, and maybe this is a good reason why I should come back to council. The two bullet points confuse me. There's obviously a subtle difference between the two of them, but I think I know what it might be, but it is pretty subtle. The first bullet point says noise management and complaints handling protocols to ensure compliance with condition 25. Now, condition 25 says no excessive noise after 8:30. And the second bullet point says noise management and complaint handling protocols in relation to noise after 8:30. What's the difference between the first and the second bullet points? Well, maybe the answer is the only difference is the second bullet point relates to any noise, not just excessive noise, anywhere on the premises, not just on the veranda. And so my question is that the difference between the two bullet points, or is there some other difference?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The intent is specifically we were giving a great deal of thought to the possibility of what had been raised in discussion at the workshop about potentially having no activity at all after a certain time, 10 p.m. And what we're trying to recognise was that after 8:30 p.m, we wanted something specifically in the management plan to cover those later hours and beyond. That was what the intent was. There's nothing more, nothing less.
I mean, I still think it's a bit obscure on the wording of the two bullet points, that difference, but if it's coming back to council, then it can be sorted out at the time, I assume.
Mr. Mayor, it's kind of covered twice over. Yeah. Dot point by 25 because they both reference 8:30. So yeah, I see your point. Yeah.
We have the motion in front of us, councillors. Any further questions or comments? We've had a pretty good go at this. We have a motion, we have a mover, we have a seconder. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried.
Division.
Call for a division. Let the record show that it was unanimous. Development Assessment Quarterly Report, item 15, page 113. You're a mover for this recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Goswich. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Price-Jones. Councillors, questions, comments in regards to Development Assessment Quarterly Report? The impressive report. Lots going on. Great information. Questions, comments, councillors? Everyone happy? Looks that way. Good report. I'll put the motion. We have a move, we have a second. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. We now have matters to be dealt with in closed committee. Item 16, tender design and construction of 4 Mile Creek Road Bridge over Swallow Creek. This matter is considered to be confidential under section 10A2 of the Local Government Act, as it deals with commercial information of a confidential nature that would, if disclosed, prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied it. And item 17, Ogilvy versus Rovest Holdings Proprietary Limited. This matter is considered to be confidential under section 10A2 of the Local Government Act, as it deals with advice concerning litigation or advice that would otherwise be privileged from production in legal proceedings on the ground of legal professional privilege. Councillors, have a mover that we go into closed committee. Thank you. Councillor Goswich has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan, I'll put that motion. All in favour? Against? We now go into closed committee. Consideration of these matters. Okay, thank you, councillors. We are now back into open council after consideration of the following matters. Item 16, tender 4/2023, design and construction of 4 Mile Creek Road Bridge over Swallow Creek. The recommendation which was approved was that council accept the tender from Murray Constructions Proprietary Limited for the design and construction of 4 Mile Creek Road Bridge over Swallow Creek. Contract 4/2023 for the value of $841,190.73 or $925,309.80, including GST and subject to variations. Item 17, which was considered in closed committee, was Ogilvy versus Rovest Holdings Proprietary Limited. The recommendation was that council note the report in relation to Ogilvy and Rovest Holdings Proprietary Limited. Council, that concludes our meeting this evening. I thank Councillor Reynolds for being online. Appreciate your input in the meeting this evening. Again, I thank you all for your attendance and declare the meeting closed.